This is session 10, where we talk about material choice. In the introduction, I talked about the importance in a green home of taking a holistic view. It's not just enough to get the design and the orientation right. You also need to think about the materials that go into that home. And you need to do it for two reasons. One, it's just ethically the right thing to do. You don't want the building of any particular home to cause hardship for poor people in faraway countries or to wipe out habitat somewhere. But also when you're living in that home, it's much more comfortable, it's healthier for the occupants, and then ultimately when that home is demolished, it's not putting a burden on future generations to get rid of toxic materials. For example, if we knew at the time we were building homes out of asbestos, what we know now, I suspect we wouldn't have done it because it's a real headache to get rid of, as you probably know. So if you're thinking about what a low environmental impact material is and what best describes that, well really it would be a product that has the least negative impact in the manufacture, the building or the use and the eventual disposal. So if you think about that, you put some thought into what happens, say, when you use timber. Well, a tree's grown and been milled to put that timber there. So intuitively, that has less of an environmental impact in its manufacture than does, say, a Bessa brick, which has had to have the sand mined, the limestone mined, heated up to 1400 degrees in a kiln, mixed in a dye, sent to a factory, made in stocks. You know, there's quite a lot that had to happen in the world for that block to end up at your place, compared to a piece of timber which grew for 20 years and then was milled. When you're using certain products, things like native timbers, very slow to off-gas, or your Bessa block is not off-gassing or slowly breaking down. Whereas if you've got plastics, certainly if you've got some of the manufactured timbers with chemicals like formaldehyde in them, then over the life of that product, that is slowly breaking down and releasing toxins into the environment and to your bloodstream. So that's that during use phase. Then of course, when you go to disposal, asbestos was an example I used earlier. If that's a product that's fine and really useful, I mean, asbestos is mined as a rock and processed in a factory, okay, but then when it comes to use and disposal, it's actually a known carcinogen, then that's not great. And that disposal at tips now is a really big problem. So again, Green Homes Australia will have thought of a lot of this in the design process and will have negotiated with the owner the sorts of products, but people are people and they will choose all sorts of stuff. I guess it's just up to you as a builder to, whatever you're using, try and get the best quality product you can and make sure that it is sourced properly and it's not substituted for some kind of inferior product, and use as little as you can, you know, avoid wasting that material, because all material has an environmental impact. The most common wall systems used in Australia at the moment are standard brick veneer walls. These are not necessarily the lowest environmental impact because you have heavy materials on the outside, which are not really of a benefit in terms of the energy performance, but and timber, multiple layers, multiple products. Compare that to a system, for example, with rammed earth, which is simply one material, hopefully found locally on site, put between some formwork which can be used again, and creating a wall. Clearly that has a lower environmental impact. Perhaps the next level up would be something like timber framing with weatherboards, which again could be locally produced and sourced, and then followed by perhaps timber frame with iron cladding. The reason that the iron cladding might have a higher environmental impact than the weatherboards, obviously the iron has to be mined and milled, whereas the weatherboard can be grown and milled locally. Although that may not always be the case. So if your weatherboards have come from China compared to the iron that was sort of smelted and produced locally, and the iron was going to last longer and not require painting, then that you might have an argument there to say that that had a lower environmental impact. Look, you can turn yourself in knots about this stuff, but ultimately it's a bit like eating, if you're eating raw foods, it's probably better than eating something from a packet. Bit like that with a home. If you're using a native or a raw product, it's probably better than something that's been heavily manufactured. At Green Homes Australia, we think it's important that the home is environmentally friendly from day one. And one of the most important ways to do that is to use products which have low volatile organic compounds, or VOC. It's a complicated sounding word, but really it just means off-gassing. That smell when you use oil paints, years ago, the old oil paints in particular, that just knocked you out when you open the tin, that's the gases that actually need to disappear so that the paint can go hard and stick to something. Well, over the last few years, they've got better and better at using solvents and particular chemicals within paint so that when it does off-gas, it's not actually as harmful to your health as the old paints. So we really stipulate the use of those low VOC paints. The advantage is, of course, that from day one you walk into a house and it doesn't stink like a new home. Other things to look out for are carpets. You can actually buy carpets that have low VOC, friendly off-gassing, and even furniture. Some of the cheaper sort of warehouse furniture places you go into, you can smell the formaldehyde when you walk into the building. So this becomes an important component of a client when they walk into a home. Not only are they seeing that it's well designed and built, but it doesn't even smell funny. It actually has a lightness and freshness about it, which makes them happy straight up and tell all their friends how wonderful you are.